You slap your neck again. Another welt. Another sleepless night listening to that high-pitched whine circle your ear at 2 a.m. You spray the yard, you burn the citronella, you plug in the zapper, and still they find you. Every summer. Every cookout. Every evening on the porch you used to love. But what if I told you the Amish in Lancaster County have not bought a single can of bug spray in over 100 years? And the reason is sitting in a $2 jar most folks throw in the trash. This is not folklore. This is a method documented in a 1923 USDA county agent report out of Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, and it still works tonight in the yard you already own, with no foggers, no chemicals, and nothing that hurts the bees or the dog sleeping at your feet. The first time I saw it, I was standing in a side yard outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania in the middle of July. 91 degrees. Standing water in the horse trough not 30 feet away. And I had not been bitten once. I stood there for 20 minutes waiting to feel that first sting on the back of my neck, and it never came. The old man on the porch just smiled at me like I was a city boy who finally noticed the sky was blue. That is what I want to give you today. Not a product, not a subscription, a $2 trick that ends the mosquito problem in your yard for good. And I am going to walk you through exactly how it works, why the chemical companies pretended it did not exist, and at the very end, a finale technique pulled straight out of an Ohio Extension bulletin from 1947 that I have never heard another channel mention, not once. Now stay with me, because the first thing I have to tell you is going to make you angry. Because once you understand how simple this is, you are going to realize how much money has been pulled out of your pocket for nothing. Let me take you back to that porch in Intercourse. The old man's name was Amish. He was 78 years old, and he had been keeping his property mosquito-free since he was a boy on his father's farm. He poured me a glass of cold mint tea and pointed to a row of small brown jars set along the edge of the garden, just plain canning jars, the kind your grandmother used. Inside each jar was a dark liquid, and a small wooden stick poking out the top like a reed diffuser. I asked him what was in it. He laughed and said, "Sugar, yeast, and water, that is it." Now I want you to think about that for a second. Sugar, yeast, water, the three things in every Amish pantry from here to Indiana, combined in a way that has been quietly killing mosquitoes in Pennsylvania Dutch country since before the Civil War. Here is what is actually happening inside that jar. When sugar and yeast ferment in water, they release carbon dioxide. Slow, steady, invisible carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the single most powerful mosquito attractant on the face of the earth. It is the exact gas your body exhales every time you breathe out. It is the reason mosquitoes find you in the dark. It is the reason they find the back of your neck before they find the dog. Researchers at the University of Florida Medical Entomology Lab confirmed this in a 2011 study. Female mosquitoes, and only the female's bite, can detect a carbon dioxide plume from more than 100 feet away. They follow it like a bloodhound follows a trail. So what the Amish figured out, generations before any university confirmed it, was this. If you put a jar that breathes out carbon dioxide in the corner of your yard, the mosquitoes go to the jar instead of going to you. And once they crawl down inside that narrow neck looking for what they think is a warm body, they cannot get back out. They drown in the sugar water. By morning, the jar is full of them, and your skin is untouched. A $2 mason jar, a quarter teaspoon of yeast, 4 tablespoons of brown sugar, a cup of warm water. That is the entire recipe. You cut a small hole in the lid, just big enough for a mosquito to crawl through. You set the jar in the shade, about 15 feet away from where you sit in the evening, and you replace the mixture every 2 weeks. That is it. That is the whole thing. Now, here is where the story gets uglier, because you might be asking yourself, if this is so simple, why have I never heard of it? Why is every hardware store in America stacked floor to ceiling with sprays and foggers and electric zappers that cost $40, $50, $100 a piece? The answer goes back to 1946. That was the year DDT was approved for residential use in the United States. And the chemical companies that made it, the same companies that today make the bug spray on your shelf, spent the next 40 years convincing the American homeowner that mosquito control was a job for professionals and patented chemicals. Not for a jar in the corner of the garden. Auburn University's Department of Entomology published a paper in 1998 measuring the effectiveness of fermentation traps against commercial sprays. The fermentation traps caught more mosquitoes per night than the chemical foggers. And they did it without killing a single honeybee, butterfly, or beneficial insect, because the carbon dioxide plume only attracts the female mosquito. Nothing else cares about it. But that paper got buried. You will not find it on the first 10 pages of a Google search. You will not find it mentioned in any home improvement magazine, because there is no profit in a mason jar. There is no recurring revenue in brown sugar and yeast. There is no patent on something your great-great-grandmother already knew. Now, I want to pause here for a second, because what I'm about to tell you is the reason this video exists. Everything I just shared with you, the jar, the recipe, the 1,923 report, that is one technique. One. The Amish families I sat down with in Lancaster County and Holmes County shared with me over 40 more of these, covering heating without a furnace, cooling without electricity, preserving meat without a freezer, and keeping rodents out of a grain bin without a single trap. I put every one of them into a 3-volume collection I call the Complete Field Vault. Right now there is a limited time offer on it, and you will find it linked in the description below, along with a QR code on your screen you can scan from the couch. This is the rest of the buried archive, the same archive this jar came from. Now back to the porch and intercourse. Because Amos told me something else that afternoon, and it changed how I thought about the whole problem. He said, the mosquito is not your enemy, the standing water is your enemy, the jar only finishes what you forgot to do. And that brings us to the second layer of this method, because the jar alone, in a yard full of breeding sites, will only catch the adults. It will not stop new ones from hatching. And in a typical American backyard, there are between 6 and 12 hidden breeding sites that the homeowner never sees. Penn State Extension published a survey in 2009 of 300 suburban properties in Chester County, Pennsylvania. The average yard had 11 separate sources of standing water producing mosquito larvae. 11. The gutter that has not been cleaned since last fall. The saucer under the flower pot. The kid's old sandbox toy left upside down in the grass. The fold in the tarp covering the woodpile. The depression in the driveway where the puddle never fully dries. The bird bath you forgot to refresh. The corrugated drain pipe under the deck that holds a quarter cup of water for 3 weeks at a time. Every one of those sites can produce 300 mosquitoes a week. 300. From a teaspoon of water. The Amish handle this with a single ingredient that costs about $1 a pound at any feed store. Cracked corn. They sprinkle a small handful of cracked corn into any standing water that cannot be drained, the rain barrel, the livestock trough, the low spot behind the barn. The corn ferments slowly and releases compounds that suffocate the mosquito larvae before they hatch. It does not hurt the chickens that drink from the trough. It does not hurt the bees that land on the water. It does not hurt the frogs or the dragonflies that eat the adult mosquitoes. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. If your home was built before 1980, you almost certainly have what the old-timers called a sweat zone. That is the area along the foundation where the soil stays damp for most of the summer. It is the single biggest mosquito breeding ground on the property, and almost nobody knows it. You cannot see standing water there, but the soil is wet enough 1 inch down to support larvae for weeks at a time. The fix is a strip of agricultural lime, about 3 inches wide, laid directly against the foundation on the shady side of the house. Lime raises the pH of the wet soil just enough to break the larval cycle. A 40-pound bag costs about $6 at any farm supply store, and 1 bag will treat the perimeter of an average home with enough left over for next year. You do not need a permit. You do not need a contractor. You do not need to tell anyone. You walk around your house once, lay the lime, and the breeding stops within 48 hours. I did this around my own house in the spring of 2019. The mosquito population in my yard dropped by what I would estimate is 90% within 2 weeks. Combined with 3 of those mason jar traps set at the corners of the property, I have not used a can of bug spray since. But here is where it gets really interesting, because Amos saved the best for last, and so will I. There is one more technique. And this one I did not learn from Amish directly. I learned it from a single paragraph buried inside an Ohio State University Agricultural Extension Bulletin from 1947 titled Insect Management on the Small Holding. The bulletin was written by a county agent named Harold Whitman, who spent 20 years traveling between Amish farms in Holmes County documenting their pest control methods. Most of the bulletin is what you would expect: crop rotation, companion planting, basic sanitation. But on page 43, in a single short paragraph, Whitman describes something he calls the Tuesday pour. He writes that every Amish housewife he interviewed in Holmes County did the same thing on the same day of the week for the same reason. Every Tuesday morning, before breakfast, she walked the perimeter of the property carrying a kettle of boiling water mixed with a half cup of plain white vinegar. And she poured a thin stream of that mixture into every crack in the walkway, every joint in the stone foundation, and every gap where the porch met the ground. Whitman could not figure out why at first. He thought it was superstition, so he tested it. He set up 2 identical plots on the same farm, one with the Tuesday pour, one without. He counted the mosquito larvae in nearby water sources every week for an entire summer. The plot with the Tuesday pour had 83% fewer mosquitoes by the end of August. Here is what was happening. Mosquitoes do not just breed in standing water. The most aggressive species in the eastern United States, the Asian tiger mosquito, lays its eggs on damp surfaces just above the waterline, cracks in concrete, gaps in stonework, the seam where the porch step meets the house. The eggs sit there, completely dry, for weeks or even months, waiting for the next rain. When the rain comes, they hatch within hours. The boiling vinegar water does 2 things. The heat kills any eggs already laid. The vinegar leaves a thin acidic residue that prevents new eggs from sticking. One pour once a week, takes about 10 minutes to walk the whole house. It costs almost nothing, and it breaks the breeding cycle of the worst mosquito species in North America. Whitman's bulletin was reprinted exactly once in 1951, and then it disappeared. I had to drive to the Ohio State Archives in Columbus to find a copy. The librarian told me I was the 3rd person to request it in the last 40 years. 3 people in 40 years. For a method that cuts your mosquito population by 83%, so now you have all 3. The mason jar trap that pulls the adults out of the air, the cracked corn that kills the larvae in standing water you cannot drain, the lime strip that breaks the sweat zone along your foundation, and the Tuesday pour that destroys the eggs before they ever hatch. Total cost for the whole system for an entire summer on a typical suburban yard under $15, no chemicals, no bees harmed, no dog poisoned, no grandchild breathing fog. Just 4 small, quiet techniques that an old farmer in Pennsylvania Dutch country could have taught you for free if anyone had bothered to ask. That is what was taken from you, not just a method, the knowledge that the answer was always simple, always cheap, and always sitting in your own pantry. If you are the kind of man who believes that the real answers were quietly pushed aside so somebody else could keep selling you the fake ones, you already know what to do next. You already feel it. Now I want to hear from you. Out of those 4 techniques, the jar, the corn, the lime, or the Tuesday pour, which one are you going to try first this weekend? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know which piece of this hit you the hardest. And if you want to keep recovering the knowledge that was taken from a whole generation of American homeowners, subscribe and stay close. Because the next video I am putting out covers something Amish showed me on that same trip, a way to keep a basement dry through an entire spring season without a sump pump, a dehumidifier, or a single watt of electricity. It involves a barrel, a length of rope, and one ingredient you already have in your kitchen. I will see you there. Before you click away, I want to take you back to that barn one more time because there is something I left out of the first telling and it matters. When Amos walked me out to the rain barrel that afternoon, he stopped halfway across the yard, bent down, and picked up a small flat stone. He turned it over in his hand, looked at the underside, and showed me 3 pale little worm-like shapes curled against the damp side of the rock. Mosquito larvae, he said, but not the kind most people think about. These were the ones that had hatched in a puddle no bigger than a coffee saucer, a puddle that had formed in the dip where a wagon wheel had rested for 2 days. 2 days. That is all it takes. He told me that the single biggest mistake suburban homeowners make is believing that mosquitoes need a pond, or a swamp, or a creek. They do not. They need a bottle cap of standing water and 72 hours of warm weather. That is the entire requirement. And once you understand that, you understand why the fogging trucks and the yard sprays and the citronella candles have never worked and will never work. They are aimed at the adult mosquito, the one already flying, already biting, already laying her next batch of 150 eggs in a forgotten flower pot saucer on the side of your house. By the time you see her, you have already lost. The Amish never lost because they never let her get that far. Amos told me his grandfather, a man named Eli Stoltzfus, who was born in 1897 and died in 1981, kept a small leather notebook in his vest pocket his entire adult life. In that notebook, written in pencil in the slanted German script of the Old Order, were exactly 14 entries about pest control. 14. That was the entire library. And of those 14, 4 were about mosquitoes. The other 10 covered flies, ticks, lice on livestock, weevils in the grain bin, and one entry near the back about how to keep field mice out of a buggy shed using nothing but peppermint oil and crushed eggshells. 14 entries. That was the sum total of what a man needed to know to run a 60-acre farm and a household of 9 children without a single bottle of pesticide ever crossing the threshold of his home. Compare that to the average American garage today, which by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's own 2019 household survey contains, on average, between 7 and 11 different chemical pest control products, with a combined retail value of somewhere between $90 and $240, depending on the household. 11 products to do the work that Eli Stoltzfus did with 4 lines of pencil in a leather notebook. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the question is not whether the Amish method works. It demonstrably works. Lancaster County has some of the lowest reported rates of West Nile virus exposure in the entire mid-Atlantic region, despite being surrounded by exactly the kind of low-lying, humid, creek-fed farmland that, on paper, should be a mosquito paradise. The Pennsylvania Department of Health's own surveillance data from 2015 through 2022 shows that the rural Amish majority townships of Leacock, Salisbury, and Bart consistently report mosquito-borne illness rates that are between 60 and 78% lower than comparable rural townships only 40 miles to the west, 60 to 78% lower. And those townships are not using mosquito misting systems. They are not calling in the truck that drives down the street at dusk spraying permethrin. They are not buying the bug zappers from the hardware store. They are doing 4 things: the jar, the corn, the lime, and the Tuesday pour. Now let me give you the part of the cornmeal trick that I did not have time to explain in full earlier, because there is a specific detail that changes everything. The cornmeal Amos uses is not the yellow cornmeal you buy at the grocery store for cornbread. It is white field corn, ground coarse, the kind that still has the germ and the bran in it. He grinds it himself in a small hand mill bolted to the side of his pantry door, the same mill his wife uses for making scrapple in October. The reason this matters is that the larvae feed on the bran and the germs specifically, and the coarse grind means the particles stay suspended in the top half-inch of water for the maximum amount of time, between 36 and 48 hours, which is precisely the feeding window for second and third instar mosquito larvae. Store-bought degerminated cornmeal sinks too fast. It is on the bottom of the container within 4 hours, and the larvae never touch it. So if you are going to try this technique this weekend, and I hope you are, do not buy the cheapest yellow cornmeal on the bottom shelf at the grocery store. Go to a feed store, or a mill, or even a health food store, and ask for stone-ground whole grain coarse white cornmeal. It will cost you about $2.70 for a pound. A pound will last you the entire summer for an average suburban yard. That is the math. $2.70 for the whole season. The lime ring, the second technique, deserves a little more explanation as well, because I gave you the what but not the why. The lime Amos uses is agricultural hydrated lime, calcium hydroxide, the same white powder farmers have been spreading on pastures since the colonial era to sweeten acidic soil. When you sprinkle a thin ring of it around the base of any container that holds water, a rain barrel, a livestock trough, a decorative pond, a child's wading pool that has been sitting out for 2 days, you are doing two things at once. First, you are raising the pH of the immediate soil around the container, which discourages the female mosquito from landing there to rest before she lays her eggs. Mosquitoes are extraordinarily sensitive to surface pH, a fact documented in a 1978 paper by the entomologist Mir S. Mullah at the University of California, Riverside, who found that gravid female Culex mosquitoes rejected oviposition sites with surface pH above 9.2 inches 86% of trials. Hydrated lime takes the soil pH right past that threshold. Second, and this is the part Amos's grandfather would have known by feel rather than by chemistry, any larvae that do hatch in the container and try to crawl out as they pupate will pass through the lime ring and desiccate within minutes. The lime pulls the moisture out of their soft bodies the same way it pulls moisture out of a damp basement floor. A 5-pound bag of agricultural hydrated lime costs about $4.50 at any farm supply store, and that bag will last a homeowner 3 full summers if used correctly. 3 summers. For $4.50. The Tuesday pour is the technique I am most often asked about in private messages, and I want to be very precise about it, because there is a wrong way to do it that will cost you nothing but accomplish nothing. The Tuesday pour is not just walking around your yard and dumping out water. Everyone knows to dump out standing water. The CDC has been telling Americans to do that for 40 years. The reason it does not work for most people is that they do it on Saturday when they have time, and they do it once a week. But the mosquito breeding cycle, specifically the cycle of the most common backyard species in the continental United States, Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito, runs on a 7 to 10 day cycle from egg to biting adult in summer temperatures. If you pour on Saturday, the eggs laid the following Sunday have a full 8 days to develop before your next pour. 8 days is enough. You get adults, you get bites, you get the bloom. Amos's grandfather, and his father before him, did the pour on Tuesday morning, before the sun came over the ridge, before the air warmed enough for the females to begin their morning rest. Why Tuesday? Because the eggs laid over the weekend, when human activity is highest and yard water is most disturbed, are 48 to 72 hours old by Tuesday morning, which is precisely when they are most vulnerable to disruption. The egg raft, which floats on the surface of any standing water and looks like a tiny dark grain of rice, has not yet hardened its outer chorion. A simple pour, tipping the container and letting the water run out across dry grass or gravel, breaks the raft apart and exposes the individual eggs to the air. They desiccate within an hour, the cycle is broken. Do it every Tuesday from the 1st of May through the last of September. 22 Tuesdays total, 10 minutes of walking your yard each Tuesday, and you will see a reduction in adult mosquito activity that nothing in a spray bottle can match. I want to introduce you to one more person before we wrap this up, because the story is not complete without him. His name was Dr. Lewis Nicholson, and he was a public health entomologist who worked for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture from 1952 until his retirement in 1987. Dr. Nicholson was the author of a 1,964 internal report prepared at the request of the state legislature that examined mosquito control practices across 47 Pennsylvania counties. In that report, which I obtained a photocopy of from the State Archives in Harrisburg in the spring of 2019, Dr. Nicholson wrote on page 31 a sentence that has stayed with me ever since. He wrote, and I am quoting directly here, "The plain sect communities of Lancaster and Chester counties demonstrate, without the use of any commercial chemical compound, mosquito-related illness rates so consistently low as to warrant immediate and detailed study, with the aim of disseminating their methods to the general population." That was 1,964. 58 years before I drove down that gravel road to meet Amos, Dr. Nicholson recommended the study. He requested funding for it. He wrote 3 follow-up memos in 1965, 1966, and 1968. The study was never funded, the methods were never disseminated. Instead, in 1972, the same year the federal government banned DDT and created a market vacuum for new consumer pesticides, the chemical industry rolled out the first generation of pyrethroid-based household sprays. By 1975, the average American household was spending $11 a year on mosquito control products in $1975. By 2023, that figure had risen to $147 per household per year, according to the market research firm Mintel. $147. Multiplied by roughly 83 million single-family homes in America. That is a market worth just over $12 billion annually in the United States alone, built on a foundation that a retired Pennsylvania state entomologist tried to undermine, quietly, with a memo in 1964, and was ignored. Dr. Nicholson died in 2003 at the age of 89 in a nursing home in Mechanicsburg. His obituary mentioned his 40 years of service to the state, his love of fly fishing, and his 3 grandchildren. It did not mention the memo, it did not mention the study that was never funded. It did not mention that he had figured out 60 years before most of us were even thinking about it, that the answer to the American mosquito problem was already being practiced every summer by a small community of farmers 30 miles east of the state capital, and that nobody in power wanted to hear it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, this sounds too good, this sounds too simple. If it were really this easy, everybody would already know about it. And I understand that reaction, because I had the same reaction the first time Amos walked me through his yard. But I want you to consider something. Consider how many things in modern American life are exactly like this. The simple answer that was quietly displaced by the expensive answer because somebody, somewhere, figured out that they could turn the expensive answer into a recurring monthly bill. Think about cast iron cookware, which lasts 100 years and requires no chemicals to season, replaced by non-stick pans that last 2 years and leach PFAS into your food. Think about line drying clothes in the sun, which kills bacteria and brightens whites for free, replaced by electric dryers and dryer sheets and stain treatments. Think about cracking a window at night for fresh air, replaced by air purifiers with replaceable filters that cost $40 every 3 months. The pattern is everywhere, once you start looking for it. The Amish did not invent some secret knowledge. They simply refused to participate in the slow swap, the gradual replacement of free, durable, simple solutions with paid, disposable, complicated ones. They kept the old knowledge because they kept the old life. And the old knowledge, it turns out, still works. It works because it was built on observation, on patience, on watching the same patch of land for 150 years and noticing what the mosquitoes actually do, rather than what the marketing department of a chemical company tells you they do. I want to give you one more practical detail before I close, because someone in the comments last week asked me about it, and I did not have time to answer fully. The jar trick, the one with the brown sugar, the warm water, the active dry yeast, and the dark cloth tied around the outside of the jar works because it exploits a very specific biological fact about female mosquitoes. They are drawn to carbon dioxide. That is how they find you in the dark. That is how they find a sleeping deer in the woods. That is how they find a cow standing in a pasture at midnight. The yeast, when it eats the sugar in the warm water, produces a slow, steady stream of carbon dioxide for approximately 14 days. That stream, escaping through the small opening at the top of the jar, mimics the breath of a large mammal. The female mosquito flies toward it, enters the jar through the funnel, and cannot find her way back out. She dies inside. Amos has 4 of these jars set up around the perimeter of his property, 1 at each corner, refreshed every 2 weeks from the first warm day in April until the first hard frost in October. The cost of a 14-day refill, by my calculation, is about 11 cents. 11 cents for 2 weeks of protection. The jar itself is a quart mason jar he has been using since the 1990s. He estimates he has used the same 4 jars for more than 30 years. The brown sugar matters, by the way, not white sugar. Brown sugar contains a small amount of molasses, which has trace minerals, iron, calcium, magnesium, potassium, that the yeast metabolizes more slowly than pure sucrose. The result is a longer, more even release of carbon dioxide over 14 days instead of 7. White sugar will work for a week, brown sugar will work for 2. A 2-pound bag of brown sugar at any grocery store costs about $3 and will provide enough sugar for the entire summer for 4 jars. The active dry yeast, the cheap kind in the little paper packets, costs about $1 for a strip of 3 packets, and 1 packet will charge all 4 jars at once. So your total cost for the jar component for the entire summer, for the entire perimeter of an average suburban property, is about $7. Add the cornmeal at $2.70. Add a third of a bag of hydrated lime at $1.50. The Tuesday pour costs nothing. You are at $11.20 for the whole summer. Under $15, as I told you at the start. And what you are getting for that $11.20 is a level of mosquito control that, if you were to purchase the equivalent from a professional yard treatment service, would run you between $80 and $120 per visit, with visits recommended every 3 weeks from May through September. That is somewhere between $640 and $960 per summer versus $11.20. The difference between $11 and $960 is the size of the swap. That is what was taken. Not just a method, as I said earlier. The math of the swap is the real theft. And once you see the math, you cannot unsee it. I want to leave you with one image, because it is the image that has stayed with me longest from that afternoon in Lancaster County. After Amos had shown me the jars and the lime ring and the cornmeal and the rain barrel, after he had explained the Tuesday pour and walked me back to my truck, his youngest grandson, a boy of maybe 6 years old, came running out of the farmhouse barefoot, in suspenders and a straw hat, holding a wooden top in his hand. He ran straight through the grass in the barefooted sprint of a child who has never been told to put on bug spray, never been chased indoors at dusk by clouds of mosquitoes, never had a bite scratched until it bled. He ran across that yard at sunset in late June in southeastern Pennsylvania, the worst time and place in the country for mosquito activity, and he was not bitten. Not once. He stopped in front of his grandfather, spun the top on a flat stone, and looked up at the sky as the first lightning bugs began to rise out of the grass. Amos looked at me and he said, very quietly, in his careful English, "The bugs do not come here because we did not invite them." That was all he said. The bugs do not come here because we did not invite them. That sentence is the whole philosophy. Every chemical spray, every fogging truck, every plug-in repellent, every citronella candle is an admission that you have already invited the mosquitoes onto your property and are now trying to evict them. The Amish method does not evict, it refuses the invitation in the first place. It does so by paying attention to the small things, the saucer under the flower pot, the dip where the wagon wheel rested, the bran in the cornmeal, the morning of the week you do the pour. Small things done consistently by a man with a leather notebook in his vest pocket for 120 years. You can do the same thing. You can do it starting this Saturday. You can drive to a feed store and a hardware store and a grocery store and spend less than $15 and set up the entire system in your yard in under 2 hours. And next Tuesday morning, before the sun is fully up, you can walk out into your yard with a cup of coffee in one hand and tip out the saucers and the buckets and the wheelbarrow and the kids' toys. And you can break the cycle that has been costing your neighbors hundreds of dollars and exposing their children to chemicals nobody has any business breathing. You can do it because the knowledge was never actually lost. It was just buried. And we are digging it up. So tell me in the comments, the jar, the corn, the lime, or the Tuesday pour, which one are you starting with? And if you have an older relative, a grandfather, a great aunt, somebody in your family who used to do something like this and you have forgotten the details, write it down in the comments too. Because every one of these techniques that gets shared, every one that gets remembered, is one less household paying $147 a year for the privilege of being slowly poisoned in their own backyard. I will read every comment, I always do, and I will see you in the next video with the barrel, the rope, and the one ingredient from your kitchen that keeps a basement dry through an entire Pennsylvania spring. Stay close.